Hi guys, my name's Jawad. I'm the VP Education, and today I'm with colleagues from the University Wellbeing team. Hi guys, would you like to...
Hello.
Hello.
So we're here with Daniel and we're here with Josh as well. Would you guys like to introduce yourself?
Dan, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go first. Hi everyone, my name is Dan. I'm part of the Counselling and Mental Wellbeing service. I am a accredited BACP counsellor. That's the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. I've worked as a counsellor for a few years in lots of different settings, including Aston University. I'm an integrative therapist, which basically means that I tailor the work that I do to each individual client that I work with. So I bring in lots of different kind of approaches in order to do that. Yeah, it's me. Josh?
Well, that was succinct, kind of difficult to follow. Well, I'm Josh, and I'm also a counsellor with the UKCP, which is another accrediting body for counsellors. I also work in an integrative way, but primarily from a CBT standpoint at Aston. Lots of quite varied experience. Most of mine actually comes from a prison background working with offenders, so a lot of experience with men who have fallen through the cracks in the system and trying to help them improve their own lives too. So it's different work, but it's interesting in itself.
That's amazing, guys. Thank you for introducing yourself. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about exam period. And as you guys know, we're coming up to our exam period here at Aston. And as you know, students, when they get to this period, start to become stressed, either overwhelmed, or they think they're robots and can do work for 24 hours straight and not take any breaks. But thankfully, we have our wellbeing team and we have these amazing counselors who are going to give us advice about how we can stay healthy and how we can have a fresh mind to make sure that we can battle through these exams in the best way possible and make sure that our performance are at optimum level. So, guys, I think my first question is going to be to you guys is, what are the two top tips you would give to students during this period? It could be more than two.
Pressure.
Should I kick off?
Please do.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a few things. And I guess just to backtrack a little bit on that, maybe the first thing to think about is maybe what's kind of happening to us in this period of time. So, you know, when we talk about being stressed and feeling stressed, what does that kind of actually mean, and what does it look like? Somebody once described it to me as a kind of emotional hijack, and I think that kind of resonated quite strongly with me. So it feels like a very physical response to something that's happening to us. It's like the logical part of our brain shuts down, and the logical part of our brain is the rational part, which would be the most useful when we're trying to get into doing exams and presentations or kind of work generally. So it feels like that kind of shuts down and we get this kind of fear response. It's supposed to be a short-term response, and as a short-term response, actually, it's quite a helpful tool, because you know you might be threatened by something, but in terms of preparing for exams and doing the work for that, it's not very helpful. So what I sometimes think about is the difference between being stressed and being stretched. So being stressed is what I just kind of described, but being stretched is when we can kind of take on something, achieve it, feel good about it. When we feel good about it, boosts our self-esteem, boosts our confidence. So what we're looking for in this period of time that we're going into is a kind of balance between being stressed on one end and being bored, which is the other side of things that we don't want. This kind of walk down the middle of being stretched. So your question was about the kind of things that might be helpful. Josh, I don't know if you wanted to. Did you want to mention some of those things? You're happy for me to kind of carry on waffling?
I don't mind. I can intervene to some degree if you like. Dan's a very eloquent man. He can probably say it better than I can, but I'll give it a go. A tip that I think I can really personally relate to, that I try to pass on a lot, is, and kind of links quite nicely to what you were saying, Dan, which is not to try and go at 120% all of the time in this period. And it's easier said than done, because I think when you're in it, and you can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak, because there's exams and work everywhere, and it feels like you have to be redlining the whole time, by which I mean running yourself at the absolute maximum of what you can do. And actually, I often find that that's quite counterproductive, because you can only keep that up for a minimal time. We're not designed to be able to operate like that for an extended period. So, and then what happens is we end up burning out or feeling our motivation completely decline on just not being able to look at it and not really knowing why we're doing it. And so, paradoxically, I find this also easier said than done, to be quite frank. But truthfully, is a really good tip is to purposefully schedule in time to take a break, and not just take a break as in, well, I didn't do anything today, but actually intentionally do something where you've planned not to work. Because a lot of the students I speak to, if they've not done anything, it's not really a rest, because they've still been thinking about the work the whole time. So when they come back to the work, it feels like they've never left. They're not really rested, and then it gets more stressful, and it creates this sort of cycle where you're trying to rest but you can't. So then you come back to the work and you're more stressed, and so on and so forth. So a big one is genuinely take care of yourself. Aim for 80 to 85%. Make sure you have breaks. And the reality is that most of the time you end up working more productively and to a higher quality when you've had rest, because you simply can't run on empty. You couldn't drive a car on empty, could you?
That's right, and there's a lot of research around small kind of chunks of study. So, you study for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Actually, that's a much more productive way to do things, and you learn so much more doing it that way than you would if, as you're saying about people sitting in front of their laptop. And we've all done it. We've all kind of studied at university, and we've all been through that kind of feeling where I just can't stop. I've got to keep going. I've got to keep going with this. But yeah, it's getting that balance right. It's interesting, Josh. I remember when I was a student about 300 years ago. There was a friend of mine.
Over 30, mate.
Thank you very much. There was a friend of mine who I was studying with, and he produced this amazing kind of study timetable that he showed me. I remember it so well, and it was so detailed with what he was going to do and how he was going to study. But there were no breaks. It was like 9 till 9 in the morning until 9 at night. It was just, okay, I'm doing this, studying this, doing that. And of course, the whole thing fell down after day 3 because, he hadn't built in time to eat or drink or go to the toilet or kind of, do stuff that you wanted to do. So yeah, that having breaks is, and we forget, we kind of say that to ourselves, but then you're right, Josh, it feels like it's, can I allow myself to do that? Can I allow myself to have that break?
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't say this from a place of perfection or being very good at it myself. Sometimes after the fact, I'm good at looking back and saying, okay, I should have done that and I should have done this. And as a therapist, I always think, well, sometimes from an outside perspective it's much easier to say than it feels to actually do it. And I'm a fairly constant work in progress. I've tried to pull off a dissertation in a week. And that's kind of how I learned this lesson. It never works. It just stresses me out. I get to the point that I can't think, really. So it's important just to, try and be kind to yourself where you're able. If it's thankfully we're heading into nice weather, and the lockdown restrictions are easing a little bit here and there. So where you can, rest and unwind and do nothing to do with university for a while. It's important to have a more rounded sense of well-being rather than being too absorbed by it, and in my experience, it'll make you better off in the long run.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like students tend to work 7 days a week continuously and they don't put those breaks in, and I think that's what causes students to kind of just shut down completely near that exam period. So I think that's amazing. And Dan, you mentioned something about like stress as well.
Yeah.
How stress, you have to have that balance. How would you advise like students to not have negative stress and have that positive stress that motivates them?
Yeah. Well, that's And that's the kind of the nub of it, really. I'm a great believer that and Josh, I don't know, Josh may disagree with this, I don't know, I've never said this to him, but I'm a great believer that our thinking kind of creates reality. So if you tell yourself that you are going to be incredibly stressed, this is all going to be a nightmare, you're going to be doing this all the time, you haven't studied enough, then that's going to kind of come to pass. If you can go into something thinking, okay, this is going to be challenging, but I've got the capability to do this. You're at university, so you've got to university. You've got here. You're doing what you're doing. You've got through school and college or whatever, and however you've got to do this. So you've kind of achieved those things. If you can kind of link back into those and remind yourself of that as well, and tell yourself that that you've got this in a way. If you can visualize the success of it, if you can rehearse the positive of it, and I don't mean just being kind of visualizing the success of getting your exam results, you can picture that, but also if you can visualize, prepare yourself for sitting down to do the exam. And I know it's going to be a different environment this time because obviously, you're at home a lot of the time, people are doing them at home. So, but if you can kind of visualize sitting down and doing it, and kind of getting into it, preparing for it, it's a performance. An exam is a performance. It's like you're going into something and you're performing as you would in any other kind of performance. There's a great activity sometimes that I've done where to kind of visualize that the kind of the idea that thinking creates reality. If you imagine you've got a lemon and you're holding a lemon in your hand, okay, guys, do this, play along. Okay, so visualize a lemon, okay, in one hand, you got a lemon, and a knife in the other hand, okay. So feel the weight of the lemon. Okay, you can feel it, you can look at it.
Doing it off screen, but I promise you I am.
Yeah. You can see the color of it, you can feel it, feel the weight of the lemon. Okay, and if you cut the lemon in half, pull it into two parts, and then look at the half that you've cut and look at, give it a squeeze, feel the texture, maybe smell it a little bit. You can see the kind of bubbling juice coming up a little bit as well. Now, if you bite into the lemon, can you taste the lemon?
Do you want me to bite into it now?
Yeah, bite into it. Okay, that was like a shorter version of it, but the idea is that you can really taste the lemon, you can feel the lemon, you can kind of really get into it. That idea, but there's no lemon. Obviously, it's in your mind. So the idea, the idea about this kind of thinking, creating reality, and if you can do that for positive things, if you can visualize that success, then it can help you. Of course, when you're feeling stressed, your mind is sometimes in a different place to when you're not feeling stressed, you may be more able to do those things. So it's trying to get yourself into a place where you're not you're not feeling stressed, and things like breathing exercises can help with that. Maybe we can talk a little bit about those later on a little bit, I don't know, but yeah.
How about
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that was amazing, in depth. That's how you like.
I'm just thinking, Dan, to add onto that, the whole thinking, creating reality, it occurred to me as you were talking, actually, as we were doing the lemon exercise. But a lot of how we feel about things is framed by the situation that we're in. And quite often, and I really do believe this, I've noticed it in myself, that there's very little difference in our bodies between anxiety and excitement. And of course, when these go to extremes, then it's a different, but in the sort of day-to-day level where you feel anxious about something or you're feeling dread about something, maybe, well, actually, that a lot of that is framed by how we're looking at it as well. So I mean, I'd say that the difference between walking, well, not now, but the difference between walking into an exam and the difference between waiting in line for a roller coaster that you've never been on before, very little actually in terms of how you're feeling about it, except one you're looking forward to and the other that you're dreading because it's framed by the situation. And the fact, and once you become aware of that, if you can harness that as well to go, okay, this is an exam, but actually I've worked all of this to get here, not to try and avoid this. This was actually what I've been aiming for this whole time. And I've had students say to me that I'm dreading that I've only got a month left and being completely overwhelmed and not being able to harness that. And often I'll say, well, yeah, but you've only got a month left.
Mm. Yeah.
Actually, I'm saying the exact same thing, except all I'm doing is reframing it from, oh God, I've only got a month left, to, yes, in a month, that's all I've got to do. I've done 3, sometimes 4 years of this, and I've got 1 month left, and I've got here. And often it's just reframing it in a way to something that you can be excited for and look forward to, rather than just having to dread what you have to do in the meantime. Because as Dan said, if you've got this far, the odds are that you do have the capability and the skill and the strength to get over the finish line. It's just that you forget that in the midst all of it. So quite often, yeah, I think reframing it, if you have an exam coming up, great, this is the finish line.
Yeah.
I get to sit this exam, I've got this far, I've got the knowledge to get this far, so it makes sense that I'm going to get over that finish line. So often reframing something as excitement, because sometimes that can be what anxiety is. It can be the excitement of something that comes next. It just doesn't get to develop that far because we're stuck in the thinking process of, oh God, it's an exam, which I find quite useful.
And the fact that it's got a definite endpoint as well. I mean, that's the beauty of this as well. The kind of sense we're talking about, when I was talking about stress being a very short-term response, where that this will end. The exam you will go to the exam, or you'll have the exam, and then it will be finished, and you will have done it. Whatever happens, whatever the outcome of that is, it will be done. So you've got that definite endpoint, and knowing that can really help to focus in the period of time up to that, I guess, as well.
That's actually amazing. I'm learning so much myself as well whilst I'm talking to you guys. It's just picturing everything in different ways. But it's actually interesting to think about it like that. Like, you don't realize the end point. You realize the things that are in that moment, and I think in that moment, you think, what if I go into that exam and I forget? But instead, you should think about how you're going to be able to celebrate after that period.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's amazing.
Well,
But
that's the anxious brain that's saying that. That's that, oh my God, I'm going to forget everything. Oh my God, I'm not good enough to be here. All of that kind of negative stuff that we have going on, it's there. It's like, yeah, here we are, and it's kind of being triggered by that feeling of going into an exam. So you're right. It's trying to listen to that, be aware of it, but also kind of go, okay, I understand what's happening there, but I can do this. I've got this because I've done it before and I've been okay. Yeah.
And sometimes, well, in my experience, I often find that you can frame anxiety as the difference between where you are now and this hypothetical future that you're thinking of. And often I find it useful in my own life. If I've fallen into a bit of a daydream about what's going to happen during this exam, am I going to fail this exam, or am I going to pass this exam? And then regardless of that, I'm like, oh God, then what after the exam? And I'm already worrying months, years sometimes into the future. And often I find, and I think Dan was alluding to this earlier on in a big way, but if you just stop and allow yourself to be where you are for a moment, 9 times out of 10 in that immediate moment, most things are okay. Like right now, I could be worrying about something that's going to happen the weekend, but actually if I was just to look around me now, I'm quite safe, and usually it's because I've gotten lost in a sort of a fantasy about the future. And it's almost never as bad as the fantasy in your head believes it's going to be, because by the time you get to your future, well, that is just now, and then you'll carry on going through it, and then you'll be worrying about the next 3 months. So I often find that being present where you can be useful.
I think as well, keeping things in perspective too. I mean, obviously your students, this is important. This is what's going on in the here and now, but it's also important. Maybe I don't know, the academics might be kind of kicking us for saying this, but the exams aren't everything. You are not just your exam results. When employers are looking at you, they're looking at a whole. They're looking at the whole of you. It's important sometimes to remind yourselves of that. But it's and it's easier for people like Josh and I. Well, me, who's Josh is still a lot younger than I am, obviously, but
To
some
what
of
look
us, some of us who, and it's that thing where, people say, oh, with experience comes these kind of hindsight, moments, and it's really annoying when you're being told that by somebody, because I can remember being told that. But there is some truth in it, because you are not just, at the moment it is really important, as Josh is saying, but with exams and stuff, but you are not just, how in 10 years time, in 20 years time, in 30 years time, and it's hard to think about these things, but when you look back on that, how significant is doing that exam actually going to be? There's going to be a whole life of things that are much more much more significant to you, that you'll remember probably from your time at university as well, than actually sitting your, I mean, I don't remember sitting my exams. Do you?
No, you make a good point there, Dan. If anyone
I
I've
must have done them at some point.
to that's gone from uni, no one has ever said, "Oh, I had a really great experience doing my dissertation." It's usually about, I don't know, drunken memories, usually of some kind, or the friends that you made, or
Yeah,
things
of
that
course.
happened, or a funny memory from a lecture one time. Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Actually, I was just thinking.
But that comes with time, and that when you've got to deal with what you've got to deal with in the moment, then it's hard to think about that. But yeah.
Maybe just as a final point from me, anyway, because I realise that I can. Once I feel like once Dan and I get started,
That's completely fine.
I'll ask you ask as many questions.
But I would say that, and this again, it comes with experience, and it's easy to say in retrospect. But I think it's also quite important to perhaps reflect on, not to use too clinical a term, I suppose, but reflecting on your own hierarchy of values, because I think with a lot of students at the point they are in their lives and their academic careers and their further careers and their current careers, if depending on the course that they're on, I think that there's a need to be perfect and to be getting firsts and 70% and 80%. And sometimes I see students that got 80% and disappointed. I don't think I've ever got 80% for anything in my entire life. And I often think that there's a value system there that's inherent, which is that the highest value is getting amazing grades at everything, and then everything else sort of comes after that. And I often think, certainly in recent years, that reflecting on it, a more useful value is resilience first and then grades after, because ultimately, I mean, not to sound like a Debbie Downer, I suppose, but none of us can do perfectly in everything we do. It's quite literally, it's impossible. It's not an achievable goal. Yeah. And I find it to be just as much, if not more, of a skill to be able to dust yourself back off, stand up, and carry on after something goes wrong, than perhaps getting high grades all the time, because ultimately that's just as necessary a skill in uni as anything else. So perhaps just focusing on resilience as much as performance, and knowing that you have the ability to get back up after a knockdown.
I think that's the main. I feel like that's a big issue as well in itself, because I feel like the students out there who want to constantly perform, and this also linking back to exams, they want that constant performance. They need to achieve that high grade, but if they don't achieve that high grade, the knock-on effect after that is quite negative, because they don't know how to deal with it. But they don't realize getting us 60% and above, that's still good. That's above average. Like, they don't need to beat themselves up. Like, you're still doing amazing, and I think that's the message to get out there. But I want to also touch on another thing, like, what can students actively kind of do, like either in the day-to-day life to the run-up of exams or during the exam, to stay healthy and not get too overwhelmed? Because as soon as I think you guys, Sydney, or you guys have experienced it yourself, that when as soon as you're in that exam, you end up getting too overwhelmed. But we're in a completely different situation now, where we're in the comfort of our own home. We're kind of away from those stresses of not being in the exam hall either. But how can students deal with it during this period?
Well, that's going to bring its own kind of different kind of stresses as well. Because as you were talking, I was kind of visualizing what it would be like to sit an exam at home. And obviously, you've got all the stresses when you go into an exam hall, but I guess you got to get the buy-in of everybody around you as well. So everyone's got a different home situation, and you've got to really make sure that the people, your family, if you're living with your family, that they're aware of what you're doing, that you've got that time to do the exams, that you've got that, you've got people bringing you food if you can do that, if you've got people kind of family looking after you or friends looking after you, so everyone's kind of involved in you doing these exams. So if the door's going to go, then you're not the one that has to go and answer it necessarily, or you can kind of build that. So it's really important to get the support, I think, of the people around you, to get to kind of keep those connections going, and that, I mean, that doesn't mean kind of going out partying all the time necessarily, but it's kind of making sure that that other people are kind of involved in what you're doing. I think in terms of physically looking after yourself, and we said earlier, sometimes these things sound like a bit of a record that's going round and round, and we know this stuff, but it's always worth reminding ourselves about it. Obviously, making sure you're looking after yourself, eating properly, eating the right kind of food, having that kind of brain food, the slow energy release stuff. Trying to avoid the kind of processed foods, keeping your blood sugar levels kind of at the right level, avoiding processed foods, and having those breaks as well, having proper meals and having food breaks, keeping yourself hydrated. I think I was reading something earlier that said that if you're properly hydrated, it can boost your exam performance up to sort of 10%. So these are the kind of physical things we forget about, as we were talking earlier. When you're just doing your exam, you're just revising, or you're in your exam, it's all you're thinking about. But actually, you've got to take care of the whole of you as well. And getting some exercise. I mean, we talk about the benefits of exercise. And again, I don't mean running a marathon, although obviously I'm running a marathon every week.
Every day, isn't it, Dan?
Every day. Well, if I can squeeze one or two in, so yeah. So for me, as someone who's not particularly into exercise, just going for a walk, just getting outside, the sun's out at the moment, that could just boost you, getting blood flow to the brain, help you to motivate yourself as well. So these are things we all know and we all hear time and time again, but if you can make it a part of your day, if you can make it a part of your routine, because it is about routine, then it can really, and as Josh was saying earlier, allowing yourself that, saying, actually, this is a part of, this is doing these things is as much a priority as actually doing the studying. When you sit there for a long period of time, suddenly stuff stops going in, and you stop. It's, well, actually, there's no point in me staring at this screen or at this book. I mean, the way I've sometimes approached things is kind of limbering up to it a little bit. So if you're thinking about the exam, okay, think about where you're going to be sitting, think about what you're going to have with you, think about when you're going to have your break, well, how's it all going to work, kind of plan it out so you've got the structure ready before you sit down to do it. If you're talking about preparing in terms of revising and that kind of stuff, then it is about thinking, okay, what am I going to look at today? What kind of work am I, what am I going to approach next, and kind of preparing yourself so you don't just sit down and then not know what the hell you're going to be doing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are kind of things that have helped me in the past. And sleep, of course, is a big one. And we were talking a little bit about sleeping. And everyone's relationship with sleep is very different. So some people are fine. They have 8 hours of sleep and it's great. Some people struggle with their sleep. And again, it's all about routine with that. It's all about trying to give yourself a routine about sleep and trying to get into routines. Being aware again of your environment. So, if you are struggling with going to sleep, then, it's quite good sometimes to get into a bit of a preparation routine for winding stuff down. Again, I remember a while ago, I was watching the news at 10 o'clock every night, and then I was finding, well, why am I so stressed when I'm actually trying to get to sleep? I was thinking, oh yeah, it's because I've been watching the news, and that's completely not relaxing in any way at all. So, whatever it is that works for you, but getting away from screens is good, and getting away from everything. Ideally, and it's more difficult if you're in a room where you sleep in the same room that you study in. But if you can, maybe at home, if you're at home at the moment, you can you can try and keep that separate, so your bedroom is just, for sleeping. It's not for studying, and trying to separate them up a little bit so it just becomes that space. I don't know, Josh, is there anything else you'd say about
I don't know. After that,
I'm
not sure I can add much more.
Sorry.
No. I think it was great. Saved me some a job. There's a couple of things that did come to mind that you touched on, and I try and take from personal experience, because I don't say this from a place of trying to patronise anyone. I'm quite as susceptible to any of these things. When it's, especially during exam time and things like that, do massively keep hydrated where you can. So less coffee, less tea, more water. And I say this with a water bottle there and a cup of coffee there. So to my best, stop camera. But also, routine is massive, and I would say prioritize routine where you can. So things like what time you get up in the morning. If you have the ability in your life to be able to get up at a particular time every day and go to sleep at a particular time every day, do so. But again, especially during these times, it's difficult. You have students that might work on weekends where that might change their routine entirely. People have different lifestyles and experiences, and people have different level of privilege and ability in their life to do things. So it's really difficult to find a one size fits all. Something I think can be useful is perhaps to write a list the night before for things to do the next day. But that's because I really find it satisfying ticking things off a list. You don't have to put a timeline next to it. I mean, micromanage yourself to that level, but just have an idea of guiding your day tomorrow. And finally, only one more thing I can really think of, and this works in a lot of areas of life, I find, but if you're feeling a bit, despite all of that, if you're feeling a bit down feeling a bit humdrum and like your energy levels, you've tried everything you can and everything is just low, well, try doing just 10 minutes or something. Because if you've planned a whole day, if you've planned to do something for 2 hours and you feel terrible and you're exhausted, you've had 4 hours sleep, you're on your 17th coffee by 9 a.m. sort of thing. Well, rather than going, I cannot face 3 hours of essay writing right now, I just haven't got it in me. Well, don't face 3 hours then, face 10 minutes. Say it and mean it. You're not trying to trick yourself. Actually say, well, okay then, I'll literally sit down for 10 minutes, and if I still can't do anything after that, all right, I'll go watch Netflix, go play some PlayStation or something. But and mean it, really do. You're not trying to trick yourself. But in my experience, what can often happen is that when you stop thinking about it as Everest and there's 3 hours of work that you've got to do, sit down for 10 minutes. And if you actually manage to get something done in 10 minutes, there's only two options, isn't there? You've either done 10 minutes more than you would have done, which over a week is a couple of hours potentially, or you feel a little bit more enthusiastic than you did when you started, and maybe you do 20 minutes, maybe you do 25. And it's sometimes just lowering the mental barrier of what you can do to allow you to start. Because it's something in CBT called quite black and white thinking, where it's I either do what I said I was going to do, or I don't do anything at all. And there's a lot of in between in there. I aimed for this, and I only got this, but this is still better than not starting at all. And momentum is a really powerful thing. So just try and take advantage of it. If you can't do 3 hours, do 2, do 1, do half an hour. But that's always more than nothing. And that's a really big thing I find when I come across a mental block.
Yeah. And you're right, Josh, sometimes it is just breaking. And if you can break that cycle, then stuff happens from that, doesn't it? Sometimes. I mean, I know the same, and it's happened to me where I've been like, I just cannot be bothered to do anything. Okay, I'll maybe go and start something, and then actually it goes on, and suddenly you're doing a lot more. But you're right, it's that breaking of the.
I think. Yeah. I'll speak from someone who obviously runs 3 or 4 marathons a day.
I've seen you. I think I've passed you on my route.
Just on my left, just bolting past. Yeah, makes me feel terrible. But I would say it's a little bit like, I try not to humble brag, but let's say a little bit like going to the gym, for example. If often the worst part is actually starting there or getting there. Yeah. Once you're there, suddenly it's a bit like, well, I'm here now. I might as well do something, and I've started, and now I've done more. but often getting there is just the worst thing in the world, and it's not too dissimilar to academic work. Getting to the point of starting can often be the worst part of it, but once you started and you might realize you know more than you thought you did, or you just get along with it. Well, it snowballs sometimes, and it's quite helpful.
I think, yeah, that's some it's important points as well. Like, everyone finds it difficult to start anything, and I'm glad you used the point of gym. Like, since gym opened, I think my first day back was yesterday, and it's just getting that momentum back, go back. And once you're there, it's like, you know what, I feel quite good about myself, and I think that's same as academics. Like, even if you do half an hour, you still did something, and like you said, it's better than nothing, because then you're one step ahead. You're going one step towards your end goal, and that's better than nothing, to be honest. But I think the last thing that I want to touch on is that as students during this period, we tend to compare ourselves with other students. So as you know, with the student population, with social media and everything, WhatsApp, students posting, oh, I'm doing all this work. And then you tend to sit back and think, oh, I'm not doing the same amount of work as them. What kind of advice would you give towards that? Because that also has a negative impact on student performance, especially at exam period. And the thing that I say is that you should never compare yourself to others, because for all you know, you might know a lot more than they do, or they might know the same amount as you. What you see isn't the same. But what do you guys think? I want to hand over.
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and this is something we encounter. I encounter for myself, for other people, for all of us, because as human beings, we do this. We compare ourselves to other people, and you're right with social media and all of that. You know, which is not something I had to deal with when I was a student. You know, it's yeah. You've kind of got this coming at you all the time. You know, in terms of, you know, if you see someone else revising and they're doing loads and loads of revision and they're kind of revising all night and all day, and, you know, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Well, actually, that's not the best way to learn. You know, you've got to take these breaks. You've got to do it in small chunks. So whilst they may be doing something in that way, that might not be, you know, that might not be the best way to do things. So yeah, I guess it's difficult, because we do want to compare ourselves, but our experiences are unique to us, and that's the most important part of it, I guess, is to try and always remind yourself that you are you, and this is your life. These are your exams. This is your revision that you're doing. What you may see from other people may not be as you said, may not be exactly what's going on. You know, I always find it extraordinary on things like on social media, where, you know, people portray themselves, they have a version of themselves. Well, and we see that version of ourselves, you know, themselves and ourselves, and we kind of work with that, and it's like, well, actually, that's not that's not necessarily what's going on. So it's trying to be mindful of that, I guess, and remind yourself of that. And you're in this for the long haul. You know, this is a long, you know, this is a long life hopefully ahead of us, a long process. So yeah.
Yeah, I was drawn back to the marathon and not a sprint.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's difficult. I'd sort of split that question in two a little bit, and the first one, I suppose, is about I would say comparing to others in general. And I don't even know if it's possible in this day and age. I'm only 31, but I think I'm going to show my age now. But during a really crucial period, if you can bring yourself to do it, delete the apps.
Yeah.
Or there's apps you can get that will limit your screen time and things like that. I know I'm probably sounding a little bit decrepit when I say that. What do you mean, delete an app? Are you mad? But honestly, that's the first practical thing that you can do about that. And secondly, I've got a bit of a story, and this is I'm not gonna give any names, because this is wholeheartedly true. This happened 5 years ago, I think. I was during my degree, longer than that, during my master's, we were doing our first exam, and one of the people on the course, it was only a 3,000 word essay, and this person come up and they were talking about the fact that they'd done 16,000 word draft. And I hadn't done anything. I'd not. And when I say I'd not done anything, I'd not thought of a plan to do anything at that point. So I was having actual heart palpitations, going, "She's done 16,000 words, and I've done literally nothing." Anyway, it turns out that doing 16,000 word drafts for a 3,000 word essay is more of a problem than doing none, because actually you've gone way off track. You've done not what you should have. And the point of it is that it can be misleading. It's a difficult one to say, but try and have where you can have some faith in yourself. If you felt okay before you started before you heard about someone else's progress or lack of, and if you felt all right just before that, well, think about what changed in reality in that moment. The world hasn't changed, your situation hasn't changed. It's just that suddenly you're worrying about what this other person might be doing. And the reality is that I know from experience that quantity does not equal quality, for one. And like Dan said, everyone has their own experience. Some people are people that prepare way in advance, do loads of stuff. Well, that might affect the grade, it might not. But don't assume because someone else is doing something different to you that person is automatically doing something right and you're automatically doing something wrong. People have different processes on the lead up, and if you get to 10 minutes before your deadline and you've still got 3,000 words to write, okay, maybe it's a fair assumption by that point. But honestly, it's comparison truly can be the thief of joy.
Yeah.
And as long if measure maybe yourself, if you're doing an exam this time, well, look at how you did your last exam and then think, okay, have I improved on that process, or how well did I do in my last exam? So if I'm doing really well in exams already, then maybe the process you've got is already helping. And if you didn't do so well on your last exam, well, go, okay, so that person is not me. So what didn't I do last time that I could do this time to help improve that? But ultimately, walking someone else's path and doing things in the way that other people do them, if it doesn't work for you, then don't try and force that or feel too worried about it, because as Dan said, on social media, you only hear about the highlights, don't you?
Yeah.
You don't hear about the hundreds of students that were either did great and didn't brag about it, or didn't do great and didn't brag about it. It's you get a bit of a confirmation bias, don't you? Because you're only seeing the things that people want to brag about. And why wouldn't you? I'd be the same way. I don't air out my dirty laundry if I can help it, but if I've got some good news, I'm likely to hear it. So, yeah, that would be where I would sit with that.
Yeah. Nah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think some important points you guys have highlighted, and I think you guys highlighted some amazing tips as well during this session. I wish I could go on for a lot longer because some of the tips you have given and some of the stories are just amazing.
Oh, you have to stop us, because Dan and I actually could just go.
We could go on for hours.
That's completely fine.
You might not want
editing, they still have a joy. But it's been great, and thank you guys for coming along. And I think the final message from myself is to students is that make sure you guys check up on each other, even your friends, your flatmates, and those around you, because this period has been odd for all of us, let's just say. And I think it's important that we just carry on checking up on each other, especially during this period and exam period. Don't go isolating into a room and not coming out. That's the most important thing. And remember, guys, you guys are part of a community here at Aston that is willing to help. We've got Dan and Josh here, who are part of the Wellbeing team, who are always open and out there to help you. So do reach out to them. But guys, any last words from you guys before we end?
Well, I was just going to say, yes, we probably should say that if you do want to access support, obviously we're just two of the team. There are lots of us, so there's lots of different people. And
are we arguably the best looking on the team, though, or is that up for debate? Do you reckon?
Well, I don't. Yeah.
You guys can
well,
claim it now.
I think we probably are.
It's live.
Although I'm gonna get absolutely I'm definitely gonna get shouted at now. Let's just say that.
We won't let them watch this, Josh. We won't let them watch.
That can be edited out. Probably.
Yeah, and there's lots of resources as well. You know, if you don't want to access the support, if you don't feel you want to do that just yet, then you might, you know, there's things like Together All, which I know that you guys in the student union promote as well, and there's lots of resources out there, and yeah.
I might, as a final word, what I might say is that for anyone that, you know, does feel isolated or is feeling a bit burnt out or feeling down or anything, do come along. Counselling and therapy, it's not this mystical thing. We can't actually read your minds or anything like that. I've heard some funny stuff over the years, but
Yeah,
it's a space for you to come and talk things through, and fundamentally it's a space where you can go see someone who really is there not to judge you, just to listen to you, and has your best interests at heart. And it's there's nothing mystical or voodoo about it or anything like that. So yeah.
yeah.
That's great, guys. But yeah, guys, good luck on all your exams that are coming up. And remember,
Yeah.
stay together, look out for each other, and trust me, you guys all have this bag. But thank you, Josh and Danny, for joining me today and spending your morning talking and giving amazing advice. But to all the students, we hope to see you guys soon. And yeah, goodbye.